The sky above Virginia Beach was painted in pale gold that morning, the kind of soft light that made the ocean shimmer like glass. The air smelled faintly of salt and roasted beans, drifting from a small cafe tucked at the corner of Atlantic Avenue, a place called Harbor Brew. Locals loved it for its calm, for the way time seemed to slow there. The steady hum of the espresso machine blended with the low murmur of conversation and the soft jazz spilling from a dusty speaker in the corner. At a table by the window sat Ava Daniels, a woman who blended into the background so effortlessly that people often forgot she was there at all. She wore a plain gray hoodie, faded jeans, and sneakers that had clearly walked more miles than most people drove in a week. Her hair was tied back in a low ponytail, strands of sandy blonde escaping to frame her face. She looked peaceful, or maybe just tired. But behind that calm, there was history. To anyone watching, she seemed like any other customer, sipping her black coffee and reading a worn paperback. But inside, her mind worked differently. Ava's eyes were always scanning, not nervously, just aware. Years of conditioning had left her unable to truly relax. She noticed everything, the sound of the espresso machine sputtering at slightly uneven intervals, the way the barista switched hands when lifting the milk jug, the subtle click of the front door whenever someone entered. That awareness wasn't paranoia. It was training. Ava Daniels had once served as a Navy SEAL, one of the very few women to complete the brutal selection process that broke even the strongest men. She'd spent years in shadows, completing missions that would never be written about, wearing uniforms that didn't bear her name. She'd lived through desert heat, icy seas, and the unrelenting silence of war zones where one wrong breath could end a life. Now, she was just another civilian trying to rebuild her sense of normal. The cafe was part of her routine, her small piece of peace. Every morning, she arrived at exactly 8:30, ordered the same thing, medium roast, black, no sugar, and sat by the same window seat. The staff knew her, but not about her. To them, she was simply the quiet regular. Today, she was rereading a novel she'd carried through 3 deployments. It wasn't really about the story. She barely noticed the words anymore. It was about the quiet, about reminding herself that stillness could exist without danger. As she turned a page, a father and daughter walked in, the little girl in a bright yellow raincoat, giggling as she tried to carry her oversized hot chocolate. Ava smiled faintly. Small moments like that reminded her why she'd endured everything, so people like that could live without fear. For a while, the morning was perfect. But peace, Ava had learned long ago, never lasted long. At exactly 9:02 a.m., the bell over the cafe door jingled again. 3 men entered. They didn't fit the place, loud, restless energy clinging to them like static. The first one, tall and broad-shouldered with a red baseball cap turned backward, scanned the cafe with that swagger of someone looking to make an impression. The second, shorter and wiry, carried himself like a follower, constantly glancing at the first. The third trailed behind, quieter but mean-eyed, the kind who didn't talk much, but always went along with trouble. Ava didn't look up, but her senses sharpened immediately. Her training kicked in before she even realized it. 3 men. Average build. Slight alcohol smell. Aggressive postures. Their laughter forced. She didn't tense. She just became still, the kind of stillness that came before action. The trio ordered loudly, cracking jokes the barista didn't find funny. A couple near the counter shifted uncomfortably. They seemed to thrive on that discomfort, feeding off the attention. When they got their drinks, the tall one, Jake, judging by the name stitched into his mechanic jacket, noticed Ava sitting alone. "She's cute," he muttered to his friends. Sitting there all serious, probably waiting for someone who won't show. The wiry one chuckled. Or maybe she wants someone to talk to her. Jake grinned. Then let's not keep her waiting. They walked over, the sound of their boots thudding against the wooden floor. Ava could see their reflection in the cafe window now. 3 shadows closing in. She didn't move. Didn't even blink. "Hey there," Jake said, leaning slightly over her table. "Mind if we sit?" Ava didn't respond. She just turned a page. "Oh, don't be like that," said the wiry one. "We're just being friendly." Still nothing. Jake's grin faltered, replaced by irritation. "You deaf or something?" The cafe had grown quiet. The barista looked up, uncertain whether to intervene. 2 men near the counter watched, frozen halfway through stirring their coffee. No one spoke. No one moved. Ava finally looked up. Her eyes, calm, steady, almost bored, met Jake's. "I prefer to drink my coffee alone," she said evenly. It wasn't rude. It wasn't fearful. Just factual. But Jake didn't like that tone. "You got an attitude, lady?" He leaned closer. "You should learn some manners." Ava exhaled softly, setting her book down. "You should learn when to walk away." Her voice was low, almost gentle, but something in her tone made the quiet man in the back take half a step away. Jake, though, mistook her calm for weakness. He chuckled. "Feisty. I like that." He reached for her phone on the table. And in that split second, that single foolish motion, something changed in the air. Ava's expression didn't shift, but her eyes hardened. Her hand twitched, so subtly that no one in the cafe noticed. Her muscles loosened, not tensed. Every nerve in her body sensed to a rhythm she hadn't needed in months. Awareness, control, response. Her mind ran through options faster than thought. Distance, 2 feet. Targets, 3. Nearest exit, left side. Obstacles, chair, table, coffee cup. Objective, neutralize threat, minimize damage. Jake's fingers brushed the phone, and that's when her instincts whispered, 15 seconds. She didn't act yet. Not yet. Years of discipline had taught her restraint, to assess, not to react blindly. Her pulse didn't rise. Her breath stayed even. From the counter, a nervous man whispered, "Should we call someone?" The barista shook her head slightly, too afraid to escalate. The world outside the cafe went on. Cars passing, waves crashing, a jogger tying his shoe, completely unaware that inside, something dangerous was about to unfold. Ava's thoughts drifted, oddly enough, to her last mission overseas, the desert night, the weight of her gear, the command in her ear whispering wait for the signal. That patience had saved her then. It would save her now. Jake smirked, mistaking her silence for fear. He leaned even closer, his voice dropping. "I said." Ava took one last sip of her coffee. Her eyes didn't leave his face. In precisely 15 seconds, the entire cafe would learn who she really was. The 3 men didn't notice the shift in the air, the almost imperceptible tightening of muscles in Ava Daniels' frame. They were young, loud, and arrogant, the kind of men who believed the world existed to prove their dominance. Jake, the tallest, swaggered closer, the other 2 flanking him like predatory shadows. "Seriously, lady," Jake said, leaning over the table again, "you can't just ignore us." Ava's gaze flicked to the door behind them, measuring escape routes. Then to the chairs, to the table, even to the heavy espresso machine behind the counter. Every detail mattered. In her old world, missing one detail could mean death. Here, it was only embarrassment, but she treated it as seriously as any mission. The wiry man, Tom, snorted. "She's just scared," he said, grinning. "Look at her. All alone. Bet she cries if we push her a little." Ava's lips twitched, not in amusement, but in the tiniest hint of a warning smile. Her mind calculated angles and reactions. Tom, thin, quick. Jake, strong, overconfident. The third, Mark, hesitant but capable of impulsive violence. The calculus was simple. If one moved wrong, the others would follow. Jake reached for her phone again. Seriously, hand it over. We're just trying to have a little fun. Ava didn't flinch. She picked up her coffee cup slowly, sipping it like she had all the time in the world. You won't have fun here, she said softly, almost conversationally. Tom laughed nervously. What's that supposed to mean? Ava finally looked at them fully. Eyes sharp, focused, almost cold. It means I don't play games. And you're not going to like the rules. Jake leaned even closer, mocking. Rules? You think you're some kind of cop? No, she said, calm, precise. I'm someone who's survived worse than you. And that's all you need to know. The cafe went quiet. A few customers glanced over, sensing tension, but not fully understanding what was about to happen. The barista froze behind the counter, coffee cup in hand, heart thumping. Even the little girl in the yellow raincoat paused mid-sip. The world outside continued. Gulls cried. Cars rolled along the boardwalk, oblivious to the storm brewing inside the tiny cafe. Jake, however, misread her silence as fear. He smirked and reached to grab her wrist. Let's see if you're really tough, he said. And that's when Ava moved. Not in panic, not in anger, but in absolute control. Her hand snapped to his wrist in a fluid motion, locking it and twisting with precision. Jake yelped, taken completely off guard, losing balance and stumbling backward. His coffee went flying, spraying across the floor in a brown arc. The cafe erupted. Chairs scraped, cups clattered, and a few startled customers gasped. But Ava's focus never wavered. She pivoted slightly, using Jake's momentum to redirect him toward the nearest chair. He fell against it with a crash, wind knocked out of him, eyes wide with shock. Tom lunged next, trying to grab her from the side. In a single motion, Ava sidestepped and hooked his leg, sending him sprawling to the ground. The cafe grew deathly silent. Only the soft jazz continued, oddly juxtaposing the chaos. Mark, the hesitant one, froze. His eyes darted between Ava and his friends, realization dawning far too late. She was no ordinary woman. She moved with precision, efficiency, and a calmness that screamed experience. Sit down, Ava said, her voice low but carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. The words weren't a threat. They were an order. Mark stumbled backward, unsure, while Tom groaned on the floor. Jake struggled to get up, disbelief etched on his face. He had expected fear, compliance, maybe even tears. Instead, he found a force he couldn't calculate. A few bystanders began recording on their phones, unable to tear their eyes away. Social media would soon be flooded with clips of this moment, but Ava wasn't concerned. She didn't seek attention. She just ensured safety, for herself and everyone else around. Don't move, she said again. Her tone was sharper this time, no room for argument. She adjusted her hoodie sleeve slightly, the smallest movement signaling control and readiness. The three men, now disoriented and terrified, slowly complied. The cafe manager, a large man with salt and pepper hair, appeared from the back room, eyes wide. Whoa, what happened? He stammered. Don't worry, Ava said, returning to a seated posture as if nothing had occurred. It's handled. The barista, still behind the counter, whispered to a nearby patron. Who? Who is she? Ava ignored the question, scanning the room as she had instinctively done every morning. Everything accounted for. No lingering threats. Minutes later, the police arrived. Officers rushed in, guns holstered but alert. They quickly assessed the situation. Statements were taken, but as one officer whispered to another, recognition crossed his face. "Wait, you're Ava Daniels, aren't you? From Team 6? Ava nodded, quietly, modestly. Yes. The three men, now sitting on the floor with their hands behind their heads, could only stare. Their arrogance and laughter had vanished, replaced by fear, disbelief, and humiliation. They had walked in expecting dominance. What they had found was precision, skill, and calm, deadly efficiency. Outside the cafe, the morning sun climbed higher, warming the streets. The sound of the ocean drifted faintly through the open windows. And inside, the cafe slowly returned to normal, though the air still hummed with the residue of what had just occurred. Ava remained calm, sipping her coffee. To everyone else, she seemed almost casual, serene even. But she knew, and had always known, the world was not always peaceful. Sometimes, danger arrived in the form of overconfident men who underestimated one small, quiet woman. She set her cup down. Her gaze drifted back to the book she had been reading. Everything else was background noise now. For Ava Daniels, surviving wasn't about strength alone. It was about control, timing, and awareness. And today, that combination had kept herself, and everyone else in that cafe, safe. The three men would leave with bruised egos, but more importantly, a lesson they would never forget: never underestimate someone they cannot see clearly. And Ava, just another civilian to the world, returned to her quiet morning, sipping her coffee, her mind already drifting to the day ahead, calm, focused, prepared for whatever came next. The cafe was still vibrating with residual tension from the sudden scuffle, though Ava Daniels herself remained deceptively calm. She sipped her coffee again, watching as Jake, Tom, and Mark slowly realized they had underestimated her. Their initial bravado had dissolved into confusion, fear, and a bruising humility that would linger far longer than the physical discomfort of their tumble. A few customers whispered among themselves, exchanging glances that said, "Who is she?" But no one dared speak directly. The manager hovered near the front, arms crossed, uncertain whether to call the police again or simply let the situation diffuse. Jake, the ringleader, wiped coffee from his face, his jaw tight. "You think you're some kind of superhero?" He spat, his voice trembling slightly with embarrassment. He tried to regain control, to reclaim the dominance he thought was his by birthright. But Ava's gaze held him still, unyielding, almost hypnotic in its calm authority. "I don't think anything," she said, her voice low, steady, controlled. "I act when I need to. And right now, there's nothing to act on." Tom, the wiry follower, groaned as he struggled to sit up, rubbing his arm where he'd hit the floor. He looked to Jake, hoping for guidance, but Jake's face revealed the same dawning realization. They had been wrong. Dead wrong. Ava leaned back slightly, her body language relaxed, but her mind sharp. She could feel every pulse of tension in the room, a quickened heartbeat of a terrified teen, the shallow breathing of the barista, the silent awe of a man perched in the corner with his laptop. Everything mattered. Every detail counted. "You don't get it, do you?" Ava continued, her tone almost conversational. "I don't respond to intimidation, and I certainly don't negotiate with threats." Jake tried to scoff, but found no courage in his voice. Mark, the hesitant third, barely dared breathe. Every instinct Ava had honed over years of Navy SEAL training screamed at her, control the situation. De-escalate if possible. End it efficiently if necessary. And so she waited, calmly, letting the weight of her presence do the work that force alone could never achieve. The barista, finally finding her voice, whispered, "Should I call someone?" Ava's eyes flicked briefly to the counter. Police are on their way, she said. No one else needs to get involved. Let's keep this simple. Jake bristled. You think a couple of cops are going to scare me? Ava tilted her head slightly, a subtle warning in her expression. No, she said softly. I don't need them. You should consider that a privilege. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, emboldened by nothing but sheer arrogance, Jake leaned forward again, placing a hand near Ava's coffee cup. You don't scare me, he said, his voice a mixture of bravado and tension. That hand, so carelessly extended, was the last mistake he would make. Ava's reflexes, honed through years of extreme combat scenarios, kicked in. Without a word, she shifted her weight, her hands snaking out in a controlled, lightning-fast motion. Her fingers clasped his wrist, twisting with the precise pressure that caused pain without permanent damage. Jake yelped, stumbling backward, his confidence evaporating instantly. Tom moved to intervene, but Ava anticipated it. With the fluid grace of someone who had danced this dance countless times in far deadlier environments, she stepped aside, hooking his leg and sending him sprawling to the floor. Chairs scraped, mugs rattled, and the cafe seemed to hold its collective breath. Mark froze. He hadn't yet acted, but his wide eyes betrayed the horror of witnessing someone dismantle 3 men in mere seconds, all with control, precision, and frightening calm. Sit, Ava said, voice low, authoritative. Not a threat. An order. The 3 men complied, trembling and uncertain. For the first time, they understood the woman they had mocked was not just physically capable, but strategically superior. She wasn't angry. She was precise. She wasn't panicking. She was observing. The barista, still clutching a damp rag, whispered to a customer, She's like a soldier or something. Not just a soldier, the other replied. I don't even know. That was insane. Ava's attention returned to her coffee. Calmly, she stirred it with a spoon, unshaken. The storm had passed, and the world could finally resume, though only the naive would believe that. Minutes later, the police arrived, lights flashing faintly in the morning sunlight. Officers entered, assessing the situation with trained eyes. Jake, Tom, and Mark remained on the floor, hands still behind their heads, still trembling. When an officer finally asked for Ava's identification, recognition flickered in his eyes. Wait, you're Ava Daniels? From SEAL Team 6? Ava nodded quietly, almost embarrassed. Yes, she said. That's me. The officer's jaw dropped. You handled them alone? I prefer not to cause unnecessary harm, she replied, sipping her coffee once again. It's more effective this way. Even the officers, trained to expect the unexpected, felt a shiver run down their spines. 3 men had attempted intimidation, and all had been neutralized in a matter of seconds. No one else had been harmed, not a single bystander. That combination of efficiency and restraint was rare, almost mythical. Outside the cafe, the early morning continued. Cars passed, waves lapped along the boardwalk, gulls cried overhead. But inside, an unspoken respect filled the air, a respect born not of fear, but of witnessing someone live fully in control of herself and her environment. Ava allowed herself a small smile. She didn't want attention or praise. She didn't even want recognition. All she had wanted was to finish her coffee, to enjoy her quiet morning. But sometimes the world had other plans that tested patience, skill, and resolve. As the police began taking statements, one of the officers leaned slightly toward another and muttered, You realize the videos of this are going to go viral, right? Ava didn't respond. She didn't need to. The truth of who she was had already spoken louder than any words could. Her mind, however, had already begun moving forward, calculating the next steps. The threat had been neutralized, but the ripple effects, the lessons learned by the three men, the reactions of the cafe, the inevitable media storm, were already underway. Ava Daniels had survived far worse than these three amateurs. She had faced combat in deserts, jungles, and foreign cities where lives depended on precision, discipline, and unwavering calm. Handling these three men, in contrast, was almost mundane. But even in mundanity, she found a lesson. The world often underestimates the quiet, the calm, the unassuming. And that underestimation can be deadly for them. The three men would leave the cafe with bruised egos and a newfound respect they didn't want to admit. The bystanders would leave with stories they would tell over and over, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. And Ava? She would leave with her coffee finished, her peace partially restored, and a reminder that vigilance never truly fades, even in moments of normalcy. Ava glanced once more at her book, opened it, and began to read, her calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos she had just commanded. The cafe slowly returned to its rhythm, the jazz softly playing, the barista breathing a little easier, and the morning sunlight streaming across the worn wooden tables. Today had been a quiet morning, Ava reminded herself. And tomorrow? Well, tomorrow would be another quiet morning, but only for those who knew how to truly respect what they could not see. The cafe had fallen into a stunned silence, the kind of quiet that only follows the sudden eruption of chaos. Ava Daniels sat with her coffee, poised as if nothing had happened, yet the air still vibrated with the energy of what had just unfolded. Chairs were overturned. A few coffee cups lay spilled on the floor, and the three men who had entered with confidence now lay sprawled or frozen in place. Their arrogance had evaporated in the 15 seconds it took Ava to show them the limits of underestimation. For the bystanders, what had happened was incomprehensible. One customer whispered, almost to themselves, "Did she just take down three men by herself?" The barista, a young woman named Mia, could barely process what she had witnessed. I don't understand," she stammered, wringing her hands. She didn't even look angry. Anger, however, had nothing to do with it. Ava's movements had been precise, calculated, and deliberate. Every strike, twist, and redirection was a product of years of training, muscle memory, and instinct sharpened in combat. She had neutralized three potential threats without unnecessary force, without losing control, and without allowing fear to dictate her actions. Jake, the tallest of the group, sat on the floor, his face flushed and eyes wide with disbelief. He tried to stand, but a gentle hand from Ava's reflexive movement blocked him before he could fully regain his footing. "Sit," she said, her tone calm but authoritative. The command was simple, yet it carried the weight of someone accustomed to life or death stakes. Tom, the wiry one, groaned, rubbing his arm where it had slammed into the floor. What are you?" he stammered, finally realizing that brute force and intimidation would never work here. Ava finally allowed herself a glance at the third man, Mark. He had frozen entirely, one foot hovering above the floor as if he couldn't decide whether to run or submit. "You have a choice," she said evenly. "Sit down, or I will ensure you can't stand for the next hour." Mark swallowed hard and lowered himself slowly to the floor. The cafe manager, a middle-aged man with a kind face, finally stepped forward. "Ma'am, what the hell just happened?" he asked, eyes darting from Ava to the trio and back. Three men attempted to harass a customer. Ava's voice was calm, measured, and I prevented them from doing so. She gestured to her coffee cup, untouched except for the sip she had taken at the very start of the incident. No one else was hurt. The manager blinked, taking in the scene. "You stopped them? Just like that?" "Yes," Ava replied. She set her cup down, her hands resting on the table. Her composure was absolute, almost unnerving to anyone not familiar with someone trained to anticipate violence instinctively. By now, several other patrons had begun to record discreetly on their phones. The small café, once a haven of calm, had transformed into an unexpected stage for a demonstration of skill, discipline, and controlled power. One customer whispered, "She's like a professional. No hesitation, no panic, just control." Ava didn't need anyone to praise her. She had trained her life for situations like this. But she allowed the world to witness anyway, not for ego, but as a reminder that underestimation could be dangerous. Within moments, the police arrived. Officers entered quickly, scanning the scene. They noted the overturned chairs, the spilled coffee, and the men now subdued on the floor. Their attention immediately focused on Ava. One officer's eyes widened. "Ava Daniels?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Yes, that's me." Recognition spread instantly among the officers. Ava had completed one of the most grueling and elite programs in the military, a Navy SEAL, and had a distinguished career. Her record spoke volumes, even without the incident in the café. The three men sat frozen, barely able to comprehend the fact that the woman they had assumed would be intimidated by them was, in fact, a decorated combat veteran. Jake's pride had been completely shattered in 15 seconds, and he could barely look Ava in the eye. I didn't know," Jake mumbled, a mix of fear and humiliation coloring his voice. Ava didn't gloat. She simply leaned back, folding her hands on the table. "Assumptions are dangerous," she said softly. "You should remember that." Outside the café, the morning sun reflected off the glass, highlighting the subtle chaos inside. A few witnesses had already posted videos online, and the story began spreading faster than anyone could have anticipated. "Woman SEAL veteran stops attackers in café" flashed across social media feeds, shared and reshared thousands of times within the hour. The viral attention was instantaneous. News outlets contacted the café for statements, while some speculated about the identity of the calm, precise woman who had neutralized three men with such efficiency. Ava, however, remained focused inwardly, ignoring the growing storm outside her small window of control. Police took statements from bystanders, who described the event with awe and disbelief. One elderly man said, "I thought I was dreaming. It was like watching a choreographed performance. She didn't even break a sweat." Ava's mind, however, wasn't on applause. She considered the psychology of the situation. The three men had entered with a sense of entitlement, relying on intimidation and their perception of weakness. She had dismantled that assumption instantly, not through rage, but through skill, awareness, and calm precision. As the officers confirmed her identity and prepared to escort the men outside for questioning, Ava allowed herself a small breath. The danger was over, but the ripple effect had only begun. The cafe patrons, still murmuring in awe, would remember this morning for years. The social media posts would continue to circulate, and the three young men, humiliated and frightened, would carry the lesson with them for life. Appearances can be deceiving, and strength often hides where it's least expected. Even as the adrenaline of the confrontation faded, Ava's thoughts turned inward. She reflected briefly on her time in the military, the countless missions where seconds could mean life or death. Each choice, each movement, had been executed with the same precision she had used here, though in far more dangerous circumstances. For Ava Daniels, stopping three reckless men in a café was not a victory. It was a routine application of training. But to the rest of the world, it would appear miraculous, almost cinematic. And in that perception lay a subtle power. People would now think twice before underestimating anyone, particularly someone who seemed quiet, harmless, or unassuming. The police eventually led the men outside, their expressions a mixture of fear, shame, and disbelief. Passers-by stared, whispering to one another about the woman they had just witnessed. Ava remained seated, calm, sipping her coffee as if nothing had happened. To her, it had been just another morning. The cafe gradually returned to normal, though the energy inside had shifted permanently. Patrons returned to their conversations. The barista resumed pouring coffee, and the soft jazz played on. Yet everyone carried with them a sense of awe, a silent acknowledgement that the quiet woman by the window had wielded power with grace, efficiency, and uncheckable control. Ava finally closed her book, resting her hands on the table. She did not seek recognition, did not crave attention, and did not even glance at the phones capturing the moment. The lesson had been delivered in 15 seconds, clear and undeniable. Strength often hides in plain sight, and appearances can be profoundly misleading. And with that, she finished her coffee, calmly paid her bill, and stepped out into the bright morning sunlight, blending seamlessly with the world outside. A veteran, a warrior, and yet a woman simply enjoying a quiet morning. By the afternoon, the story of the cafe incident had spread like wildfire. The video taken by a customer, shaky and brief, had already gone viral on social media. On Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, captions screamed in disbelief. Woman stops 3 men in 15 seconds. She's a SEAL. And quiet woman in Virginia cafe disarms bullies instantly. News outlets were contacting Harbor Brew for statements, curious to know more about this seemingly ordinary woman with extraordinary skill. Inside the cafe, the atmosphere had returned to near normal, though a charged undercurrent lingered. Ava Daniels sat at her usual table by the window, her coffee cup untouched for the past hour, as she watched the unfolding attention with quiet detachment. The barista Mia kept glancing at her nervously, whispering to other staff, "She's really something, isn't she?" Ava had anticipated some public attention. She knew the world loved a story of unlikely heroism. But she had no interest in fame or accolades. Her focus remained on something simpler, maintaining calm, composure, and control. The police officers who had responded earlier returned briefly, confirming their statements and exchanging polite nods with Ava Officer Hernandez. A tall man with a kind face leaned close and said quietly, "Ava, you really handled that beautifully. Most people wouldn't stand a chance. No one would have expected. Well, what you did." Ava nodded politely, her expression neutral. "I didn't seek to impress anyone. I prevented harm. That's all." Despite her modesty, the impact of her actions couldn't be ignored. People who had witnessed the incident were still discussing it quietly. A family near the counter spoke in hushed tones. She wasn't just defending herself. She was in complete control. "I've never seen anything like it." Outside the cafe, reporters had begun to gather. News vans pulled up, microphones and cameras ready to capture the story. Journalists called the cafe repeatedly, requesting interviews. One of them, a young woman with sharp eyes and a notebook, was finally allowed inside by the manager. "Is she available for a comment?" the journalist asked. The manager looked at Ava, whose expression remained serene. "She doesn't usually give interviews," he said, "but I think today she might make an exception." Ava regarded the journalist for a moment, considering. Then she spoke softly, deliberately. "I don't want this to become about me. The point isn't that I can defend myself. The point is that people should respect each other, without provocation, without fear, without assumption. Violence is never the first answer." The journalist nodded, scribbling quickly. "People are calling you a hero online," she said. "How do you feel about that?" Ava paused, taking a measured breath. "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who used training responsibly." That's all. Heroes to me are the men and women in service, soldiers, medics, firefighters, who risk their lives daily, often unseen. Even as she spoke, the cafe's patrons began to recognize her. Murmurs of Eva Daniels floated through the room. Some remembered reading her name years ago in military publications. Others simply watched, stunned that the quiet woman at the window had accomplished what they had just seen. Soon, a local news team arrived. Cameras rolled as the reporter said, "We're here at Harbor Brew, where this morning a woman reportedly defended herself and others from 3 aggressors. She is being hailed as a hero, but her identity and military background remain remarkable." Eva Daniels, a retired Navy SEAL, was quietly having coffee when this incident occurred. The reporter's voice carried over the small café as Ava continued to sip her coffee. She didn't flinch at the cameras or microphones. Years of operating in high-stakes environments had prepared her for far worse scrutiny. Public attention was nothing compared to the chaos of a combat zone. Later that day, the police officers returned to provide a brief statement. Officer Hernandez addressed the reporters, emphasizing the skill and composure Ava had displayed. "We rarely encounter civilians with this level of training and self-control," he said. Her actions prevented potential harm to bystanders and diffused the situation almost instantly. Social media exploded. Videos of Ava's calm yet precise takedown circulated across multiple platforms, accumulating millions of views within hours. Comment sections overflowed with awe, admiration, and disbelief. Many viewers marveled at the juxtaposition of her quiet demeanor and deadly efficiency. The hashtags #SealHero, #CAFE Acute Defender, and #15 Seconds of Calm trended nationwide. Ava, however, remained detached from the digital storm. She understood the importance of restraint, both physical and social. Her identity and accomplishments had already garnered attention before this incident, but her personal goal was never recognition. She wanted only to return to ordinary life while advocating subtly for awareness. The discipline, the training, and the struggles of veterans were often invisible, yet impactful. By evening, journalists were requesting interviews at her home. The cafe manager called Ava, cautioning her about the attention. She agreed to one interview. The limited discussion focused on her experience as a veteran, her perspective on self-defense, and the importance of civilian respect for trained individuals. During the interview, Ava spoke quietly but with conviction. "Violence isn't about proving strength," she said. "It's about protecting what's worth protecting. The world would be a better place if people assumed respect first and aggression last. I hope today reminds people of that simple principle." Her words resonated widely, echoing through social media, news outlets, and veteran communities. Many people shared the sentiment, praising her restraint as much as her skill. In comments and articles alike, the phrase "calm power" began appearing, a testament to her unique approach, formidable, precise, yet measured. Even as she gained attention, Ava's focus remained grounded. She returned to Harbor Brew for another cup of coffee the following morning, greeted with quiet nods, smiles, and subtle respect from the staff and patrons. No one called her a hero directly. Everyone understood her message. Appearances can deceive, and quiet strength is often the most formidable of all. The 3 men involved faced legal consequences, but that was only a fraction of the lesson they carried. Publicly humiliated and widely circulated online, they would remember Ava Daniels not as a faceless woman, but as a professional, disciplined, and inescapably capable human being. By the end of the week, Ava's story had transcended the local news. National networks covered it, veteran organizations praised her discretion and skill, and ordinary civilians marveled at the courage and control displayed by someone who had never sought fame. For Ava, the incident was just another day. But for the world, it became a story of revelation, that sometimes The most unassuming individuals hold the deepest reservoirs of strength. And sometimes, it only takes 15 seconds to remind an entire community of that truth. Sitting alone in her favorite cafe chair, Ava finished her coffee, letting the sunlight pour over her. She allowed herself a small smile, not of pride, but of quiet satisfaction. She had faced chaos, maintained control, and reminded the world that discipline and restraint often speak louder than aggression. And while the world buzzed with fascination, Ava Daniels simply returned to her morning routine, calm, composed, and fully aware that the ripples of 15 seconds would continue far beyond the cafe walls. By the next morning, Ava Daniels' life had shifted subtly, though the world outside might have perceived it as seismic. Social media had transformed a quiet morning at Harbor Brew into a nationwide sensation. Videos of the 15-second takedown had been shared, reshared, and dissected across platforms, accumulating millions of views. Comment sections were flooded with astonishment. Unbelievable control. She's a real-life SEAL hero. And don't mess with someone like her. Ava, however, did not scroll through these feeds. She had no desire to watch herself become a viral spectacle. Years of operating under high pressure in war zones had taught her the value of emotional discipline. Fame, admiration, or shock didn't matter. What mattered was control, both of herself and of the environment around her. The phone calls began, first subtle and persistent. Veteran organizations wanted her for interviews. News outlets requested statements. Talk shows sought live appearances. Some offered money, some offered publicity, all assuming she would embrace it. Ava declined politely but firmly. She wasn't seeking recognition. She was simply responding as she had always done, with precision and discretion. Yet despite her attempts to maintain normalcy, she couldn't escape the ripple effect. People began recognizing her on the street, whispering as she walked past, some even snapping discreet photos. Though they saw her calm, unassuming exterior, they sensed the latent power within her. They had seen it in 15 seconds of motion, enough to rewrite their understanding of what quiet strength could mean. Her thoughts returned repeatedly to that morning. The 3 men who had underestimated her were now being questioned by authorities, facing consequences they had never imagined. But Ava's reflection was not on revenge or satisfaction. It was on responsibility. She had used her abilities not to harm unnecessarily, but to prevent escalation and protect everyone around her. That principle, she realized, was often lost in society. Late that afternoon, she agreed to one carefully arranged interview with a veteran awareness organization. The goal was not fame, but education. Sitting across from the reporter in a quiet studio, Ava spoke with measured calm. "Combat teaches you a lot about life," she began. "One of the most important lessons is that you don't have to seek attention to have impact. Real strength often goes unnoticed until it's needed." The reporter nodded, impressed by her clarity. "People are calling you a hero," she said gently. "How do you feel about that?" Ava paused. "I don't feel like a hero," she said softly. "I feel like someone who is trained for dangerous situations and used that training responsibly. That's all. Heroes are the people who go to work every day, who make sacrifices quietly, who face challenges no one else sees. I just happened to act in a moment where skill and opportunity met." Her words resonated widely, shared immediately on social media by the organization's followers. Veterans, military enthusiasts, and ordinary civilians alike praised her composure and restraint, hailing her as a symbol of calm power. Articles described the event not as a fight, but as a demonstration of discipline and situational awareness, rare traits in a world often dominated by impulsivity and aggression. Even as the world celebrated her, Ava returned to her routine. The cafe remained a sanctuary, a refuge from the chaos outside. Staff greeted her warmly, Patrons smiled in recognition, and the place hummed with quiet life. Yet beneath the surface, Ava thought about the broader lessons: respect, awareness, and the hidden struggles veterans often endure once they return to civilian life. She reflected on the mental toll of years spent in high-stakes operations. The memories, the adrenaline, the responsibility, they never fully went away. Many veterans returned home to silence, struggling with anxiety, insomnia, and a world that didn't understand the training and stress they had endured. Ava had been fortunate in some ways. She had a strong network, a disciplined mind, and the ability to adapt. But she knew many of her peers did not. This realization strengthened her resolve. Her Café incident, though unexpected, had become a platform. Not for fame, not for accolades, but for awareness. People would watch the video, marvel at her skill, and perhaps, she hoped, they would pause to consider the discipline, sacrifice, and resilience that veterans carried silently. By evening, the news coverage expanded further. National television aired segments highlighting her calm authority and skill. Analysts dissected her movements, noting the precision, speed, and restraint displayed in the 15-second confrontation. Journalists speculated about her military background, her career, and her life after service. And everywhere, the public buzzed with fascination. Despite this attention, Ava maintained her quiet composure. She did not give in to spectacle. She spent her evenings at home, reading, reflecting, and occasionally speaking with close friends from her service days. These conversations reminded her of the shared understanding veterans had, a connection that transcended civilian perception. They discussed discipline, challenges in reintegration, and the subtle ways strength could be expressed without recognition. In the days that followed, Ava received letters and messages from people inspired by her story. Some were veterans, others civilians, but all shared a sense of awe and respect. "You reminded me that calm control can be the most powerful force," one message read. Another said, "I always underestimated quiet people. Not anymore." While the messages were humbling, Ava understood they were only part of the ripple. The real lesson, she knew, was subtle but profound. Strength need not be loud to be effective. Her actions in 15 seconds had changed perceptions. But the deeper impact lay in the reflection it inspired, in the way people began to reconsider assumptions about courage, discipline, and the quiet power that existed all around them. Even with social media exploding, Ava returned to her favorite café the following morning. Sunlight poured through the windows, warm and familiar. Patrons whispered quietly, some recognizing her, some still in awe. Staff greeted her politely, careful not to disturb the calm she carried. Ava sat in her usual chair, sipped her coffee, and allowed herself a small smile. The world had taken notice, but she remained grounded, her focus on maintaining balance, both internally and in the life she had fought to reclaim. The viral storm continued outside her little bubble, but Ava had already found her calm amid it. She had acted decisively when needed, maintained control, and now watched as the world learned quietly and powerfully the lessons she embodied: vigilance, discipline, and the unassuming strength that often lay hidden in plain sight. And though millions now marveled at the 15-second incident, Ava Daniels knew the truth. The impact of quiet courage extended far beyond a viral video, beyond applause, and beyond recognition. Its reach was subtle, enduring, and infinitely more profound than the world could see in a single morning of chaos. Weeks had passed since the Café incident, yet its ripple effects continued to spread. Ava Daniels had returned to her life with remarkable composure, though the world around her now seemed slightly altered. Strangers recognized her, whispered her name, and occasionally asked for photos or signatures, but she navigated each encounter with calm precision, deflecting attention without arrogance or irritation. Her real focus, however, was elsewhere, the subtle work of influence. Ava had learned long ago that strength did not require applause. It required vigilance, self-awareness, and the courage to act responsibly when circumstances demanded. The 15-second takedown had captured public attention, but it was only a small part of a much larger mission she had embraced, teaching the world about quiet strength, resilience, and the challenges veterans faced after leaving the battlefield. At a small community center, Ava quietly began volunteering. She didn't make grand speeches or flashy demonstrations. Instead, she guided small groups of young adults, some veterans, some civilians, in understanding discipline, self-defense, situational awareness, and mental resilience. Her teaching was subtle but profound. Each lesson embedded not just physical skills, but the mindset necessary to navigate life's chaos with calm control. One evening, a young man named Lucas approached her after a session. I've been dealing with anxiety since returning from deployment, he admitted quietly. I see you handle everything with this calm power. How do you do it? Ava looked at him, her expression composed but compassionate. Control starts with awareness, she said gently. Not control over others, but control over yourself. When you understand your environment and your own responses, fear loses its power. Strength isn't in aggression. It's in discipline, in knowing when to act and when to hold back. Lucas nodded slowly, absorbing the lesson. And the fear? It doesn't go away entirely? Never completely, Ava admitted. But fear can be managed. It can be channeled. In combat, in life, in moments of crisis. You survive not because you feel no fear, but because you use it wisely. Her words resonated deeply with the group. Many of them were veterans struggling with post-deployment life, trying to find balance in a world that often misunderstood their experiences. Ava became a quiet mentor, guiding without judgment, teaching without pride, and inspiring without the need for recognition. Meanwhile, the broader public fascination with her Café incident remained alive. Media outlets revisited the story, sometimes contacting her for interviews she carefully filtered. Each time she reframed the narrative. It was never about her heroism. It was about respect, responsibility, and the hidden struggles of individuals who had endured extraordinary challenges. One local journalist, persistent and earnest, asked, "Why do you insist on staying so private when so many people want to celebrate you?" Ava paused, considering her words. "Because influence isn't about applause," she said. "It's about impact. People remember the lesson, not the messenger." The moment in that café taught lessons about assumption, respect, and restraint. That's what matters, not my name, not my fame, not my recognition. If anything, anonymity helps the lesson stick. Even among friends and fellow veterans, Ava maintained a level of discretion. She attended gatherings, offered guidance, and participated in discussions, but she avoided the spotlight. Her philosophy was clear. Strength, discipline, and resilience are most meaningful when quietly exercised, not publicly flaunted. In her own private life, Ava reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From grueling Navy SEAL training to dangerous deployments overseas, she had survived because of her ability to remain calm under pressure, to calculate risks accurately, and to act decisively. The Café incident, though minor by comparison, reaffirmed her belief in preparation, awareness, and the responsibility to act when necessary. She also considered the psychological aftermath. Returning from combat meant reconciling experiences most civilians could never comprehend. Memories lingered, sometimes in nightmares, sometimes in moments of quiet reflection. Yet Ava had learned to integrate these experiences, transforming trauma into a source of vigilance and strength rather than fear or bitterness. Her influence began to extend beyond the local community. Veterans across the country reached out via email or social media, inspired not just by her physical ability, but by her mindset. They asked for advice, shared their struggles, and sought guidance in navigating civilian life with the discipline and resilience they had learned in service. Ava responded carefully, offering wisdom without intrusion, mentorship without presumption, and guidance without ego. Through it all, she remained grounded in ordinary life. She returned to Harbor Brew, walked along familiar streets, and maintained her routines. Yet every interaction, every lesson shared, carried the quiet power she embodied. She had become more than a viral story. She had become a symbol of discipline, awareness, and responsible action, qualities that transcended fame and resonated deeply with those who truly understood their value. One afternoon, as Ava walked through the cafe, she noticed a young woman sketching quietly in a notebook. The woman glanced up and whispered, "You're Ava Daniels, right? From that cafe incident?" Ava nodded subtly. "Yes," she said softly. "And your sketch?" "It's you," the woman admitted. "I wanted to capture the calm, the way you handled everything without panic. It's inspiring." Ava smiled faintly, a rare acknowledgement of appreciation. "Thank you," she said. "Remember, calm is a choice. It's not about what others do, but how you respond." As she left the cafe that day, Ava reflected on the chain of events. A brief encounter, 15 seconds of decisive action, had transformed perceptions, inspired individuals, and sparked conversations far beyond the confines of a single space. Yet she remained unchanged, anchored by principles forged in years of rigorous training, survival, and reflection. The world may have celebrated her publicly, but Ava's true influence was quiet, measured, and enduring. She had become a mentor, a guide, and a living example of restraint, discipline, and the power of subtle, unassuming strength. And perhaps most importantly, she had demonstrated that heroism was not measured in applause or recognition, but in the responsibility to act wisely, courageously, and with compassion when the moment demanded it. And so, Ava Daniels continued her life, grounded, disciplined, and quietly influential. The viral fame would fade eventually, the videos would become digital relics, and the news cycle would move on. But the lessons she embodied, the awareness she inspired, and the calm power she demonstrated would ripple outward quietly, enduring far longer than the fleeting attention of a single morning's chaos. Months had passed since the incident at Harbor Brew. The viral video had become a part of internet history, analyzed by self-defense enthusiasts, military veterans, and ordinary people alike. Headlines had called her a hero, SEAL veteran, and a symbol of calm power. Yet Ava Daniels' life remained remarkably unchanged. She still walked the streets of her city with quiet confidence, still returned to her favorite cafe, and still embraced her routines with precision and discipline. But while her personal life seemed ordinary, her influence had grown in ways she hadn't anticipated. Young adults, veterans, and even civilians had reached out, inspired not only by her actions, but by her philosophy, that true strength is measured not in aggression, but in restraint, awareness, and responsibility. One morning, as she sipped her coffee, Ava noticed a small group gathered in the corner of the cafe. They were part of a local veteran support network, quietly meeting after hearing of her guidance sessions. Ava had taught them not with fanfare, but through subtle mentorship, techniques for handling stress, strategies for personal safety, and, above all, the mindset to face life's challenges with calm and courage. A young woman, recently returned from deployment, approached her cautiously. "Ms. Daniels," she said softly, "I wanted to thank you. You've helped me see that strength isn't about fighting. It's about control, awareness, and knowing when to act. I've been struggling with my own confidence, but watching how you handled yourself has made a difference." Ava smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting calm understanding. Strength is quiet, she said. It doesn't need recognition to exist. It exists in the choices you make every day, in how you respond to fear, stress, and uncertainty. You already have it. My role is simply to help you recognize it. Outside, the city moved along as usual, oblivious to the quiet transformation happening inside the cafe. Yet Ava's influence extended far beyond the walls of Harbor Brew. Veterans in other cities began forming similar mentoring groups, inspired by the stories circulating online. Civilians who had once underestimated quiet individuals were learning lessons in humility, respect, and the dangers of assumption. The three men from that morning, Jake, Tom, and Mark, had faced consequences for their actions, though Ava had chosen not to participate in the legal aftermath. They had, however, learned a profound lesson. Appearances are deceiving, and underestimating someone based on superficial observation can have lasting consequences. Ava had taught the world something that went far beyond the courtroom, that responsibility, discipline, and calm decisiveness were the true measures of power. Despite the attention and recognition, Ava remained grounded. She continued to mentor quietly, blending her experience with humility. Her interactions were never about ego or fame. They were about imparting practical wisdom, helping others navigate life with the discipline she had honed over years of extreme circumstances. One afternoon, while teaching a small self-defense and awareness workshop for young adults, Ava observed a student reacting with hesitation to a simulated threat. She stepped forward, gently correcting the posture, guiding the student's awareness. "It's not about fighting," she said. "It's about understanding. The moment you recognize the environment, your response becomes instinctive. Calmness is your greatest weapon." Later, she walked outside, breathing in the crisp air. Sunlight glimmered on the streets, reflecting off windows and puddles from a recent rain. People passed, some glancing knowingly, others unaware of the lessons being silently taught. Ava Daniels moved among them like a quiet force of nature, unnoticed by most, but profoundly impactful to those who understood. Her story had entered classrooms, veteran support programs, and self-defense seminars. Teachers, mentors, and coaches referenced her actions not as a tale of heroism alone, but as a lesson in discipline, control, and moral responsibility. Her calm decisiveness became a blueprint for teaching others how to navigate danger, fear, and everyday challenges with composure. At home, Ava often reflected on her journey. She remembered the grueling SEAL training, the missions overseas, and the countless moments when precision and calmness had meant the difference between life and death. She understood that these experiences had shaped not just her abilities, but her philosophy, that power is silent, respect is earned through action, and true heroism is found in responsibility, not recognition. One evening, as she prepared for another mentoring session, Ava glanced at her reflection in the window. The woman looking back at her was the same one who had walked into Harbor Brew months ago for a quiet coffee. Yet she was also the woman who had, in 15 seconds, reshaped the perceptions of those around her. That duality, ordinary yet extraordinary, defined her existence. The cafe had become more than a place for coffee. It had become a symbol of calm resilience, a place where lessons in awareness, responsibility, and quiet power were subtly imparted. Patrons no longer whispered in awe alone. They carried a sense of respect and mindfulness that extended into their daily lives. Ava's influence was quiet but pervasive, transforming ordinary spaces into lessons in human strength and morality. As the sun set, casting warm hues across the city, Ava walked along the familiar streets, observing small acts of consideration, patience, and vigilance. She realized that her journey was not defined by the 15-second takedown, the viral fame, or even her career as a Navy SEAL. It was defined by the ongoing ripple effects of her choices, the way she acted, the lessons she imparted, and the calm authority she modeled for others. In the end, Ava Daniels had become more than a viral sensation. She had become a living example of quiet heroism. She demonstrated that power does not always roar, that strength does not require applause, and that the most profound influence often arises from discipline, awareness, and the responsible exercise of one's abilities. Her legacy was not built on recognition, but on the subtle, enduring impact of her presence. Those who had witnessed her, learned from her, or absorbed her lessons carried forward new understanding that courage is measured not in spectacle, but in the calm, precise, and compassionate choices we make every day. And as Ava Daniels finished her evening walk, the city settling into night around her, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She had acted decisively when necessary, mentored quietly where possible, and demonstrated to the world that true strength is often hidden, calm, and measured. In 15 seconds, she had stopped a confrontation. Over months and years, she had transformed perceptions, inspired respect, and instilled lessons in resilience and discipline. Her story, both ordinary and extraordinary, became a testament to the enduring power of quiet heroism. And in that quiet, unassuming way, Ava Daniels walked on, leaving a legacy that would echo far beyond the viral moment, touching lives quietly, profoundly, and permanently.